Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast, hosted by Eric Rostad. Join him on his 15-year journey through the immortal books. He'll share what he's learning, explore profound ideas across time and cultures, and share the one thing he always hopes to remember from each immortal book.
Today I'm going to cover the myth of the winged soul, also known as the myth of the Tripartite Soul, as found in Plato's dialogue, Phaedrus. I'm going to look at a particular portion of this Phaedrus dialogue where Plato utilizes this myth to talk about things like love, desire, education, and the soul. I then want to tie that together with direction, which is my single thread through this entire reading project. So I'll get into that a little bit later of what it means that those ideas tie together. And then I want to close by providing Plato's definition of love. So get your pens ready. You want to jot this down for your next love letter for sure. But first off, I just want to take a minute here and thank you for listening. I'm always taken aback when I meet people and they say, "Oh, just listen to this episode," and then it leads to this fun conversation. This is a passion project of mine, and it's just it's fun to know that people are listening and getting inspired to read. So thank you for listening. Secondly, I'm in a sort of a transition period this summer with the podcast, and on a few different fronts. So the first is just during the summer, I'm doing an episode every other week as opposed to every week. I'll probably get back to every week in this fall, maybe August or September. The second part of that is I'm moving the podcast to more of a video format. So this may be the last audio only version. I'm trying to get a setup in my library here where it has good sound and it has video, and I've just had a little trouble getting that going. But I think I'm in a good place for going forward now. So I want to move to video, and there's a few reasons for that. One is just that when I look at analytics for the podcast, listenership is going down while video views are going up. So people watching or listening on YouTube or Substack or some sort of a video format, that more and more people are doing that. Fewer and fewer are actually just listening. That does not mean that this will go away. If you just listen, you'll still be able to listen to the podcast wherever you currently do that. It'll be in the same place. But I want to kind of take advantage more of that video format. And one of the things that I'm excited about the video side of things is just the ability for me to show you the books that I'm talking about. So there's obviously, I'm talking about Plato today, so I would be showing that book, but I'm also tying together a number of different authors, which is kind of the whole idea behind this Great Books reading project is that it's a great conversation. So just the ability to pick up a book and say, hey, here's an idea I got from this book that ties to this book, that ties to this author, that kind of thing, I think will be really fun. Third thing I want to highlight here is that I am currently making some updates to the Books of Titans website, and that's the one that's at books.booksoftitans.com. I'm working on getting it into a format where you can create your own great books list. So you'll see the books listed on the website. You can kind of pick and choose the ones that you want to read, and then maybe give it a time frame, and then track your reading. So I'm also looking to tying that into an app of sorts as well, and that's a good marriage of my main work, which is digital advisory with this reading project. So keep an ear out for that. Let's get back to Plato here. Let's get back to this dialogue in the myth of the winged soul. So this myth is positioned as the third speech in a overall dialogue, which it actually has a number of different pieces that it's looking at: love, the soul, rhetoric. It goes in a number of different directions, but kind of an overarching theme is that of love. And so the first speech in the dialogue is one that was written down and given by Lysias. And it is in this dialogue, it's read by Phaedrus. And so this dialogue is just a conversation between Phaedrus and Socrates. They're in nature. They're walking in nature as they have this discussion, which is a rarity in a Plato dialogue. They're usually in the city. And so Socrates and Phaedrus are speaking. Socrates loves hearing speeches, and here's Phaedrus, who has a speech by Lysias about love, and so he wants to hear it. And so that's the first speech. The second speech is Socrates kind of trying to play off of that first speech and give his own speech about love. And then the third speech, Plato has Socrates do something different and go into the realm of myth. And so he shares this mythology as part of this third speech about love. And so let me just start by reading the foundation for this myth as it comes up. So I'm going to read directly from the dialogue here. So here we go. First, we have to understand the truth about the nature of the soul, whether divine or human, by considering what happens to it and what it causes to happen. This gives us the following starting point for our proof. Every soul is immortal, because anything that is ever moving is immortal. And I'll stop reading there. Every soul is immortal, and because anything that is ever moving is immortal. That's kind of the key part there. And so in talking about love, Plato, through Socrates, starts with the soul and has to prove that the soul is immortal. Now let's go to the second part of this, and we're going to talk about the soul's character. And I'll start reading here. That is enough about the soul's immortality. I must now say something about its character. So let's do that. In my analogy, a soul is like an organic whole made up of a charioteer and his team of horses. Now, while the horses and the charioteers of gods are always thoroughly good, those of everyone else are a mixture. Although our inner ruler drives a pair of horses, only one of his horses is thoroughly noble and good, while the other is thoroughly the opposite. This inevitably makes driving, in our case, difficult and disagreeable. So let me stop reading there. So just to highlight a few different things that I read there. The first is that this is an analogy, and it's an analogy of the character of the soul and about the soul's immortality. And so the analogy is that of a charioteer who is driving a chariot and has two horses. And there is a white horse and a black horse, and this is defined later on. This is not in the text that I just read, but this is where we get the tripartite soul. If you've heard that term, there's three parts of a soul. And a few things to note is that the souls of both gods and men are composite. They're both tripartite. In the gods, all the parts are good. In mankind, the charioteer is the rational part of this tripartite soul. And then the emotional aspects are the white horse and the black horse. The white horse is that of the spirited and emotional side of things, and it's what's noble. It also includes ideas of shame. And then the black horse is the appetitive, our appetites, our desires, and that consists of things like hunger and thirst and sex. And so that's always pulling us downward towards earth, away from the rim of heaven. And so you've got this split between the rational and the irrational. So the charioteer who's driving the chariot is kind of the intelligence aspect of the soul, and it's the soul's steersman. And this steersman is the rational part, the mind, if you will. And then the horses are more the emotive, the emotional, the areas of desire. And we usually use that term irrational is in kind of a negative term. It just means that it's not of the mind, it's of the emotions in this sense. What's interesting is that each part, all three parts, desire beauty, and each of them can reason. So it's not just like the horses are just following everything. Like they still have the ability to reason about what they're desirous of. So the proper order would be that that reason, the charioteer, would control the other desires, the desires of the horses. And the other piece of this, and this is something that Robin Waterfield says in the introduction in the Oxford World's Classics version of this dialogue. He says, the impulse towards pleasure is an essential part of a person's motivation. If the rational part is in control, impulse can be channeled towards the good. And that's the end of his quote there. So there's this desire. I just mentioned that each one desires beauty. Each of these parts of three parts of the soul. So why beauty? That's where we get into the next part here. And so let me read this. When the souls we call immortal reach the rim, and this is the rim of heaven, they make their way to the outside and stand on the outer edge of heaven. And as they stand there, the revolution carries them around while they gaze outward from the heaven. The region beyond heaven has never yet been adequately described in any of our earthly poets' compositions, nor will it ever be. But since one has to make a courageous attempt to speak the truth, especially when it is truth that one is speaking about, here is a description. This region is filled with true being. True being has no color or form. It is intangible and visible only to intelligence, the soul's guide. And I'll stop reading there. So let me highlight a few things here. The chariot, what is key to know about this soul that Plato is talking about is Plato thinks that this soul is pre-existing. So before it enters into a person, it exists in the heavens. And so this soul, again, is three parts, and it's this analogy is of a chariot. And there's this idea that the chariot is in the heavens, is moving towards the outer rim of the heavens to be able to see the forms and what he calls the plane of forms. And it gets these glimpses of these forms. And so it could be capital F form of beauty. And so it's taking it in at the highest level of the form of these things, something like beauty. Here's what is said about that. The souls which have seen the most are to enter the seeds of men who will become philosophers, lovers of beauty, men of culture, men who are dedicated to love, end quote. And then he goes through a number of other different types of people. And depending on how much you've seen of those forms in the soul's pre-existing condition, that's what level of person you will be. The souls which have seen the most are to enter into the seeds of men who will become philosophers or lovers of wisdom. So Plato, through Socrates, places a very high idea of the souls who have seen the most, that they are going to come to when they're embodied on earth, they will be the philosophers. But the important thing to note there is that it's only the souls who have seen these forms. And why is that important? Well, let's see how this relates to love. And so this is something that Robin Waterfield says in the introduction, which really helped me to understand this. So the first thing he says is this: love is our reaction to the half-remembered form of beauty. End quote. So when we think of having seen the soul having seen the form of beauty, when we see aspects of that beauty or instances of that of beauty on earth as an embodied person, it helps us to remember and to recall these forms of beauty that the soul initially saw in its pre-embodiment. So love prompts that recollection. So that's the second part of what Waterfield says here. Love prompts recollection. Recollection is the precondition for knowledge, and knowledge is the precondition for the right handling of words. End quote. And that kind of ties this whole dialogue together, where it starts with love. So an instance of beauty that is noticed prompts a desire for that. A desire is something that is lacking. So we desire to fulfill that lack, and that drives us towards love, which then prompts recollection. So we're recalling what we've seen as the pre-embodied soul. And then he says recollection is the precondition for knowledge, and this is where Plato wants us to move, is towards knowledge. And then knowledge is the precondition for the right handling of words, things like rhetoric and speech, dialogue, all that kind of thing. So that's how it all ties together. So beauty is the starting point, and it's our most accessible form, capital F form, that we have on earth of what the pre-existing soul would have witnessed at the rim of heaven. There's a very interesting line in this dialogue, and it says this: "It would awaken a terribly powerful love if an image of wisdom came through our sight as clearly as beauty does. And the same goes for the other object of inspired love." End quote. I thought that was so interesting because so beauty is the starting point. It's our most accessible form on earth. And the dialogue brings up the point, but what if we could see wisdom? And it just kind of brought to my mind the Proverbs, where Proverbs are embodied. So there's this idea of there is this beauty, an embodied beauty almost of wisdom. But here saying that if it would awaken a terribly powerful love, perhaps even a more powerful love than that comes through seeing beauty. I thought that was a really interesting idea there. So this all ties into education as well in this dialogue. And so for Plato, education is not kind of, putting somebody in front of a fire hose and just force feeding them information and hoping they retain some of it. Instead, it's helping that person, that pupil, recollect and remember the forms that they've seen before. And I still hear teachers talk this way of they're trying to help their students remember what they already know or that kind of thing. So we still have this idea with us a lot today. What I want to do now is take this tripartite soul, this winged soul idea, and the wing aspect of the soul is that it should be ascending. It should be ascending towards the good and the true and things of beauty. And if the black horse is taken too much into consideration, the black horse is seeking to bring us down back to earth. So there's a direction in this aspect. I want to move now to Confucius, which may seem like an odd place to go, but I want to tie this what I've just been talking about. I want to tie this to idea of direction, and something that's been a huge part of this reading project for me over the past 9.5 years. So let me read this part in Confucius. It's very, very short here. The master, and the master would be Confucius, said, "Zigong," taking myself out, again, Zigong is one of his disciples. So the master Confucius said, "Zigong, do you think I'm the sort of person who learns many things and who retains this knowledge in my mind?" Zigong replied, "Yes, is it not so?" Confucius replied, "No, I bind it together into a single thread." And I'll stop reading there. I love this one. That when I first read this, it immediately hit me, and I knew what my single thread was. And I just love this idea that Confucius asks his disciple, "Hey, of all the things I've read and speeches I've heard and all that, do you think I just remember that all?" And it's kind of a question that we all have when we meet somebody really intelligent. We have that question in the back of our mind, like, do you just remember like everything you've ever read? And Confucius, Zigong, the disciple, says, "Yeah, isn't that the case? Don't you just remember everything?" And Confucius says, "No, I bind it together into a single thread." And that clarified things for me so much, because I immediately knew what my single thread was when I read that. And I've talked to many other people since reading that, and they can identify their single thread as well. My single thread is that of direction. And what I mean by single thread is when I look back at the books I've read, there's kind of an idea that floats above all those, and something that sticks out to me in many of those books. And on the flip side of that, it actually helps me to remember the books that I've read by thinking about it through this lens of direction. So what do I mean by direction? Well, direction is this idea that we're all moving in a particular direction in our lives. It's when I say it, it just seems like a very obvious statement, but we're all moving in a certain direction, and that is dictated by small, seemingly insignificant choices that we make on a daily basis. So, when we're alone, no one's watching. It's not on Instagram. What are the decisions that we're making? Because that is setting a path for our life, and we can. It's kind of hopeful in the sense that the very next decision we make could turn the whole ship around, could get us going on the right path. But I see this in everything I read. I see it in novels. Novels are great for seeing an arc of someone's life and seeing how a really horrible decision made usually does not just come out of the blue. You see this direction, like authors just intuitively know this, that people are making kind of small compromises before they make a really terrible choice. And on the flip side of that, if somebody's a hero, they didn't just become a hero that day. It was a process of doing things that people did not see for many years, and then the situation arises where they are heroic, but you don't just become heroic in the moment. So I think about this a lot. I see it in so many of the different books I read, and I've got another episode that goes more into this, where I think we all have sort of a single thread, and it's really dictated by our past and things that may have harmed us, or some big thing that happened in our life, or some sort of a major change that happened in our life. Like it just kind of attunes our brain to notice certain things, and that could be unique for many of us. And it's certainly, from the people I've talked to, we've all had sort of a different single thread that we notice in books. So how does that relate to this tripartite soul, this winged soul? Well, I find this idea very interesting. The idea of the tripartite soul, the idea that there's a charioteer and there's two horses, this analogy, because it's all about movement. A chariot is moving. And the aim of the charioteer, the rational side, is the overall goodness for a person's life. This is the rational part of the soul. It's trying to move in a direction of overall goodness. But to do that, what needs to happen with those two horses? Well, they have to be in alignment. So base desires, the represented by the black horse, base desires, they must be tempered by the noble, the white horse. If the soul is just following the black horse, and the white horse is trying to do the noble thing, the black horse is doing trying to go more towards earth, it's going to be absolute chaos. So if there's no restraint, chaos. If you have too much restraint, you're not going anywhere. You're at a standstill. So there's a balance in this. There's the both the white horse and the black horse are moving off of emotion, or moving off of desire. But there's a rational aspect of each of these. And it's just a neat way, another way to think about this idea of direction for me. And where it all started, I started noticing it, and I started kind of making notes of where I would just write direction in the side of my books. But then in 2019, I reread Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and he has this part, which I consider to be the most important paragraph of this reading project. And he says this: I would much rather say that every time you make a choice, you are turning the central part of you, the part of you that chooses, into something a little different from what it was before. In taking your life as a whole, with all your innumerable choices, all your life long, you are slowly turning the central thing either into a heavenly creature or into a hellish creature. Either into a creature that is in harmony with God and with other creatures and with itself, or else into one that is in a state of war and hatred with God and with its fellow creatures and with itself. To be the one kind of creature is heaven. That is, it is joy and peace and knowledge and power. To be the other means madness, horror, idiocy, rage, impotence, and eternal loneliness. Here's the key part: each of us at each moment is progressing to the one state or the other. I'll stop reading there. That just kind of put it all into, really encapsulated what I started seeing in a number of books. And again, I'll link to that other episode I did on direction, where I kind of go in a little more into my story of why direction sticks out so much for me in the books that I read. Another really interesting aspect of this dialogue, and just kind of more in general, of Plato's idea of this pre-existing soul, and then the idea of recollection, is how it compares to what Christianity would present about this, and Judaism as well. Like the very first part of Genesis says that mankind was made in the image of God. So that what that does immediately, and the importance of that, is that there's an inherent dignity in each person. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is that this would be perhaps an answer or a different view than Plato, in the sense that if we're made in the image of God, perhaps instead of our soul having pre-existed and seeing these things in the heavenly realms, perhaps it's kind of written into our souls, these desires, these God-given desires, since we're made in the image of God. So just a very different way of looking at those. But I love that Plato notices it, at least, that, why is there this desire for beauty? Why is that there? In asking that question, and his theory is really interesting, in the analogy of the tripartite soul to answer that, which he does in other dialogues as well. What it's done in me is given me a desire to read some of the early church fathers, and so I've kind of made a list of these authors and these writers who actually reference this dialogue directly. And some of those are Augustine, Origen, and Gregory of Nyssa. And so I plan to read them. I don't know if I'll do that now or later, but just to kind of go further into this, so here's what Plato said about it. Now, how did the early church fathers think about this? What did they think about the recollection aspect? What did they think about the pre-existence of the soul? Catholic teaching would say the soul is created at conception. It didn't pre-exist in the heavenly realms, seeing forms of beauty and all that. So I'm just kind of curious to better flesh out those two strings of ideas and see how they influence, maybe where Plato influenced Christian thought, where Christian thought kind of responded to Plato. So I plan to do that, and then I'd love to again read the Four Loves by C.S. Lewis. There's one of the four loves is Eros, and the love that is spoken about in this dialogue is that love. It's Eros, and so I would love to read that and go into that a little bit more. Now I want to close out this episode by giving Plato's definition of love. So, put on your poet's hat and get your pen ready to write this into your love letters. You ready? The love is the unreasoning desire that overpowers a person's considered impulse to do right and is driven to take pleasure in beauty. Its force reinforced by its kindred desire for beauty in human bodies. This desire, all-conquering, in its forceful drive, takes its name from the word for force and is called eros. End quote. Not as beautiful as Shakespeare's poetry of love, is it? But I find that so funny. It's kind of like the clinical definition of love, but it does hit on a lot of what we talked about in this episode. Perhaps a more concise definition of love would be a longing that is capable of satisfaction. And I think that's one that Robin Waterfield put forward in the introduction. A longing capable of satisfaction. And what C.S. Lewis would do with that is to ask the question, if we have that desire, if we have these longings that are capable of satisfaction, or if we have longings that are not capable of satisfaction on earth, does that mean that we were made for somewhere else? And that has been just kind of really... what I love about this discussion, it's been something that I've been thinking about for many years now, over 25 years, and in this desire, or this idea of and question of why do we have these desires, and what does it tell us about ourselves? What does it tell us about God? What does it tell us about the direction that we're going in? And so I love reading these dialogues and kind of seeing what the ancient Greeks had to say about it, and then I look forward to seeing how people have responded to this. Again, this is the great conversation. The great books are the great conversation. So I know that many people will be referring to this in their own writing, and I look forward to seeing what they say. In conclusion, this tripartite soul, it shows up quite a bit in other Plato dialogues. It shows up in the Republic. I've not read that one yet for for this particular project, the Plato project. So that's coming up. I look forward to that. But this is the first place I've seen it come across. I've heard it mentioned by people, but this is the first I've seen it in the actual text. And so that was very fun. My one thing for this book is just that it's kind of sparked this desire for further exploration, to see how people have responded to this idea of the pre-existing soul, recollection, and that sort of thing. What did the subsequent church fathers say? What have other philosophers and writers had to say about that? As for what's next, I will be continuing on Plato here. So I'm in my fall semester. I switched my summer break and around to a month earlier. So I'm back early into my fall semester, which this year will be July through November, and then I'll take another break in December to read just kind of books that have piled up. And this time I'm actually going to read books about trees. I just want to learn about trees. But July through November here, I'm going to do a deep dive into Plato. I'm hoping to finish all of his dialogues, and it's been really fun so far. I do need to read each dialogue at least 2 times, so it's time consuming, but has been very, very fruitful. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at eric@booksoftitans.com. You can follow Books of Titans on Instagram and X. I'm just at Books of Titans. And then be sure to check out the website and keep an eye there just as I kind of add more features and add the ability to create your own great books list and then track your reading. You can do that at books.booksoftitans.com. If you just go to booksoftitans.com, that's my Substack. That's where I post these podcasts and in a weekly article, and you can subscribe there to stay updated on everything. Well, again, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. And I will be back in a couple weeks, hopefully on video format. Until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.